In the words of his former confidant and advisor, Chris Christie, quote, he, Donald Trump, goes to bed every night thinking about the sound of the jail cell door closing behind him. It is a primal fear of the ex-president's that one day his blatant and willful and repeated disregard of the law will land him behind bars. Two developments in the last 24 hours should be processed and understood with that fact in mind. The first, his sudden decision to cancel a planned press conference in which he had claimed he would finally unveil evidence of massive voter fraud. That, of course, would come nearly 3 years after Trump and his allies came up empty in every forum, courtroom, legislature, everywhere. Trump had promised a, quote, conclusive report and that he would once and for all be proven right. On that, the New York Times says this, quote, the report in question, according to people familiar with the matter, is a document of more than 100 pages that was compiled, at least in part, by Liz Harrington. She's a Trump communications aide who is often described as among the true believers in his false claims that the 2020 election was stolen from him through widespread fraud. But at least on this one issue, Trump appears to have listened to the advice of his lawyers. ABC News reported this yesterday, quote, Trump's legal advisors have told him that holding such a press conference with dubious claims of vote fraud will only complicate his legal problems, and some of his attorneys have advised him to cancel it. Which brings us to the second development, this one from Trump's attorneys, an audacious request filed in court last night to push back Trump's trial in the federal case regarding his efforts to overturn the 2020 election to April of the year 2026. Yeah, that's more than 5 years after the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. It's more than 3.5 years after his indictment, and more than 2 years after the 2020 election will be decided by the American people. It all ties back, though, to what Team Trump sees as one of its most viable, perhaps its only legal strategy, which is not a legal strategy at all, not to litigate completely baseless claims of vote fraud, which have been rejected by at least 60 courts. But instead, right, curtain number two, delay any and all trials until after the U.S. presidential election. And then, if he prevails, use the presidency as a veritable get-out-of-jail-free card. New York Times reports this, quote, some of the former president's advisors have made no secret of the fact that he's looking to win the next election as a way to try to solve his legal problems. If Trump, who's a frontrunner for the 24 Republican presidential nomination, can push the federal trials until after the election and prevail, he could seek to pardon himself after taking office, or have his AG simply dismiss the matter altogether. Donald Trump, this time, running on a promise to make the American people his human shields, is where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Executive producer of Showtime's The Circus and host of the Hell and High Water podcast from The Recount, John Hallman, is back with us. Also joining us, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former U.S. Attorney Harry Litman is back. I'm from the New York Times. Washington correspondent Glenn Thrush is here. Glenn, there's always an evolution, or actually that suggests progress, a devolution, where no, he's not running to pardon himself. No, he's not only running. There's no secret. There are no MAGA hats being produced and handed out. He is running so that he is never liable for his alleged crimes.
Well, it certainly seems that his political strategy is superseding his legal strategy, because some of these filings are reading like tweets. I mean, I think there was a graphic in the filing in D.C. requesting the delay that sort of showed the height of all the documents, if piled up, that the government is having him review. That it's bigger than as if you couldn't review things electronically. I mean, this is not going to sway a judge. This is not going to sway a jury. It's hard to figure out exactly how this fits into any legal context. And then the other thing was this news conference he was going to hold. You know, I wonder if Fulton County would have to re-impanel the grand jury to look at a superseding indictment if he was going to be making some of the same fraudulent claims that he made, that he's accused of in its indictment. I mean, at some point in time, you got to ask yourself, particularly if the Republican primary season seems to be as somnambulant and as one-sided as it's looking, whether or not they're really going to hunker down and develop some sort of a legal strategy, because I know here in D.C., Judge Chutkan indicated quite strongly that even if this doesn't come to trial in January, that she intends to move this thing expeditiously.
It is interesting, Glenn, too, and you and your colleagues have reported on this extensively, how totally different he is under investigation without the shield of the Justice Department, without Bill Barr as a sitting attorney general, without a memo saying a president can't be indicted. I mean, his calculations, his speech in a political context is very similar, but his calculations, like the one you're talking about, canceling this press conference so he doesn't add to his legal woes, seem different.
I mean, there's you know, I've been observing Trump for, I don't know, for 20 years, first as a reporter in New York and then covering the White House. And I got to say, the pitch of his, you know, people say he's the same, he's reverting to the same playbook. I got to say, the sort of, his tone is different. There is a sense of urgency in this tone. For instance, maybe I'm the only one that's noticing this. He's starting to use saltier and saltier language in public events that he used to restrain himself a bit. And some of these Truth Social posts, you know, I'm not saying his Twitter posts were measured, but some of them are getting even more extreme. I think his behavior is, if you're sort of looking at it over time, is changing.
Yeah, I mean, John Hallman, you're a student of sort of Trump going as far back as Glenn does. And there is something, it's hard to put this into language that doesn't get you sort of crushed by the critics, but there is something consistently dark. There is something consistently self-obsessed. He's always been dark, and he's always been self-obsessed. He is sort of a villainous narcissist, but there's something more so. And there's something more out in the open. He is running as your retribution, which means nothing, really. He's running so he can pardon himself. That's it. That's the whole campaign message.
Yeah, I mean, look, everything you just said, Nicole, is right. You know, we're talking about language. I like Glenn used the word somnambulant on this show in the 4 o'clock hour to start things off. I mean, somnambulance.
I like. Phone to go to thesaurus.com.
I think that means sleepy, but that's probably mostly what they describe as my brain too. I think, you know, look. Trump is, to borrow the phrase of Mike Murphy, you know, the atomic clock of politics. It's like he's the most consistent public figure I may have ever covered. There's almost everything that Trump does. He's in his antic, manic behavior, rooted in these fundamental things about pathological narcissism, will to power, greed, meanness. The racism, all the rest of it. Those are all have been totally consistent throughout his public life, in real estate development, in reality television, and then as president of the United States, and now as ex-president. The one element of difference here is something that I don't think we have really ever seen before, and that is, I think, a sense of fear. Trump has not been someone who's ever exhibited a lot of fear before, and sometimes you would have thought that any sane person would be more fearful. His lack of fear, his lack of shame were great superpowers for him because he didn't care about going into bankruptcy. Most of us are terrified about going into bankruptcy. He didn't care about fighting endless lawsuits. Most of us are terrified to ever have to come into under the scrutiny of a lawyer. Trump's like, let's have lawsuits. Let's have bankruptcies. I don't care. He didn't care as president about all the things that make other presidents have their hair turn gray and make them age 30 years and 4 years in office. But this is what he's afraid of. You know, the one time when we see the fear, and I think that's the undercurrent that you're picking up, is that he's just as all of those bad qualities, though they're all the same. But the thing that's the extra dose in this admixture, to use another fancy 25-cent word, this stew, this toxic stew of Trump's behavior now, the thing that makes it more simmering and more toxic is the fear of incarceration, the fear of repudiation, the fear of all of the stuff that he has most been that the fears have always been there, but now they're white out in the open, and he's running this campaign, as you say, that's so nakedly self-interested. It's not even, make America great again. What happened? That was a BS slogan, but it was about America. What's Trump's running on now? As you said, I am your retribution and please keep me out of jail. I mean, you couldn't get any more self-interested than that.
Yeah, Glenn, I want to come back and assure you that we were complimenting your superior vocabulary, not making fun of it. We are pro-intelligence here. But I want to come back to you with sort of your other hat and your other role as a Trump observer. I mean, politically, there is something that none of us is qualified to really understand. We're not sociologists or psychologists, but there's something more fevered, to your point, about the campaign speeches. And you even go back about 6-8 months. He was talking about shooting drug dealers. And again, it's so hard to make it relative with Trump because rapists and murderers was already dark and sordid and racist and disgusting. So he started below the bottom of anything anyone had ever known in American politics. But this descent has sort of gone unaccounted for. And I wonder if any of that sort of shows up or gives any pause or anxiety to his current batch. I know this can change at any time, but of legal representatives.
Well, again, I can't speak to what this particular crew is. The body language in court between Trump and his lawyers, particularly with Todd Blanche, is very buddy-buddy. A lot of whispering in each other's ears, a lot of smiles and jokes. But you just have to look. I mean, one of the things that is really worth thinking about, because part of covering Trump in any context is how history just completely vanishes, and you're kind of stranded in the here and now, decontextualized from what's happened in the past. And I think what you got to remember here is how many lawyers Trump has gone through. Some of them pretty solid lawyers, some of them peripheral lawyers. And people are getting paid a lot of money. We've seen a raft of stories from our paper and other papers about the extent to which his campaign is essentially kind of a legal defense fund with a campaign attached to some extent. So people are getting paid a lot of money, but how long are these lawyers, and this particular group of lawyers, John Lauro in particular, has a track record, a positive track record. How long are they going to be willing to, again, deal with a client who is refusing to play by the rules? Lauro, one of the interesting things in the arraignment a couple of weeks ago, is Lauro assured the judge that Trump would abide by every single term of the bond agreement. And as Lauro said that, one of the lead prosecutors, Tom Windham, kind of chuckled. So I think watching that space between Trump and his lawyers, it's always interesting. It's particularly interesting right now.